And that's because their sweet spot for having the most aggressive above ground growth is 80 to 95 degrees. They like hot weather. These are summertime grasses. If the conditions are right, if they have enough moisture, there have been instances when they have exhibited above ground. When I'm saying above ground growth, I'm talking about leaves and shoots and so on growing above the ground. They've exhibited growth even at temperatures approaching 120 degrees, but they don't like cool weather. As a matter of fact, when temperatures start dropping in the late summer, in the fall of the year time frame, kind of where we are now, we're in fall, and the daytime temperatures get down to where they're 65 degrees or so, and nighttime temperatures cooler than that, they pretty well stop most of the above ground growth. Below ground, those warm season grasses, their sweet spot for root growth is less than it is for shoot growth. They kind of like it in that 75 to 80 degrees. It gets too hot, above 100 degrees or so, they're going to stop growing roots. But, on the cool side, when it gets down to 50 degrees or below, they're all their growth stops, above ground, below ground, all together. From a water use standpoint, their efficiency of using water, they are better or more efficient at using water than the cool season grasses are. They have better drought hardiness. They can survive droughts. That doesn't mean they won't suffer and they won't be stressed out, but they'll survive. And they don't necessarily die just because it gets into a drought period. Now, if it's dry enough, long enough, yes, they'll die. But that doesn't, so far, that has not been a real issue for us here in Tennessee. From a fertilizer use standpoint, they can use nitrogen very efficiently. They have pretty good stress recovery and recovery from damage. And I think a lot of that has to do with their growth habit. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But for the most part, or many of your warm season grasses don't have any shade tolerance. They're not good shade grasses. They got to grow out in the full sun. So on the other side of that, we have the cool season grasses. And just as the name implies, they like to grow best in the cooler months or the cooler time period of the year. Their sweet spot for above ground growth is 60 to 75 degrees. Now, they'll certainly grow at higher temperatures than that, but as temperatures progress and get higher into the late springtime and the summertime frame, and we start getting those daytime temperatures of 90 degrees and above, very often they're going to start shutting down their above ground growth. And sometimes they're going to show some stress and maybe go into a semi-dormant state just to protect themselves. But they will, from a root growth standpoint, they'll grow roots down to temperatures near freezing, down around 33 degrees or so. So those grasses truly are cool season grasses. If it gets too cold, they'll stop growing above ground, 40 degrees, not much growth takes place. But those roots underneath the ground will continue to grow, approaching freezing. From a water use efficiency compared to warm season grasses, they're not as efficient, and they will certainly show signs of water stress or drought stress before a warm season grass will, typically in a dry weather condition. They typically have higher instances of disease. You'll see maybe more disease issues with those cool season grasses than they do the warm season grasses. They don't require as much nitrogen. They can't use as much nitrogen simply because of the way they're made as the warm season grasses. And because of their growth habit, and again, we'll talk about that, but they're thought to have their stress recovery is not as good as the warm season grasses are, but they do have some shade tolerance. So, you need to keep that in mind. So we're talking about the characteristics of these grasses because that's something you've got to consider when you think about a grass to choose to try to establish on your particular lawn site. So, we talked, I said there's two different kinds of grasses based on the climates they grow in. So the turf climates in the United States are broken into these areas, these regions that you see here on this map. Well, here where we live is in a zone called the transition zone. And so what that means is that the zone to our north has a cool, humid climate, and then the zone to our immediate south has a warm, humid climate. And we're neither categorized as cool, humid, or warm, humid. We're in a transition in between those two. Okay, so we're called the transition zone. Now, don't confuse the transition zone with the twilight zone, because the twilight zone, that's just an odd place. But some folks might make the connection or the comparison that the transition zone is somewhat similar to the twilight zone when it comes to trying to grow turf grass. Okay, so here we are in Tennessee. We belong to this transition zone. That's where we are, this transition zone. So what does that mean for us in terms of trying to grow grasses? Okay. We grow both. Since we're not in the cool humid or the warm humid, we grow both cool season and warm season grasses in the state of Tennessee. And depending on where you are in the state of Tennessee, you may be more prone to grow in the cool season versus the warm season. If we were starting the upper northeast corner of the state, we're going to see predominantly cool season grasses being maintained there. Now, you certainly will find examples of where folks are growing warm season grasses on golf courses, athletic fields, and their home lawns. They'll do that. But for the most part, the major turf grass grown up in the north and the eastern part of the state is going to be cool season. And as we move across the state, moving south and west across the state, we're going to move out of the eastern zone into up on the Cumberland Plateau, and there's a combination of both grown there. You get into Middle Tennessee, here where I am in Murfreesboro, and we probably grow more warm season grass here than maybe the folks at East Tennessee do, but we still have a good mix, and probably the dominant grass in most home lawns is going to be cool season. But as we continue to move west and south, and we get across the river and we start moving down towards the Alabama line, the southern tier of the state, we're going to find that more lawns are maintained in warm season grasses than they are in cool season grasses. Now, certainly you'll find some cool season grass lawns being maintained in the western part of the state, but for the most part, we're talking warm season grasses there. So we're growing both warm season and cool season grasses here in the state of Tennessee because we're in this transition zone. So a thing to keep in mind, though, is that because we're not in either a cool, humid, or a warm, humid environment, there's no turf grass species that's ideally suited for use here in the transition zone. So what does that mean for us then in terms of trying to grow turf grass? Well, I heard someone once say that what that means is we grow several different kinds of grass here. We just don't grow any of them very good. And somebody else put it this way, said being here in the transition zone, the way we grow grasses, this just gives us the ability to grow these grasses at a consistently high level of mediocrity. Now, I don't know if that's been your experience or not, but it can certainly be a challenge sometimes trying to maintain a good, dense population of turf grass in a home lawn based on the environmental conditions, the climate conditions that we often experience here in the state. So if you want to have a guaranteed green turf in your home lawn all season long, then this is probably the surest option for you out there, what you see pictured on this slide. And that's artificial turf, because that one is not going to turn brown. It's not going to go off color. It's not going to go dormant based on the climate conditions. But most folks aren't necessarily looking for an artificial turf cover, and they want to grow a natural grass. So that leaves us, with the challenge of trying to grow both cool and warm season grasses here in the transition zone. So what are the grasses that we can think about growing in Tennessee? Well, I've got them listed right here. On the cool season side, we grow tall fescue, and again, that's the dominant one. And you'll see letters in parentheses designated or listed out at the end of these grass types. So what these things mean, that this indicates how they grow, or their growth habit. So tall fescue's got a B outside. Well, that B stands for bunch. Tall fescue is a bunch type grass. Bunch grasses don't spread. They don't creep. They don't run. They kind of stay in one spot. They don't spread and creep over into flower beds or landscape beds, places like that. So they're bunch grasses. They kind of stay where you put them. Kentucky bluegrass is the next one listed there. It's not grown in nearly to the same degree as much as tall fescue is, because it requires more water and it doesn't have much shade tolerance at all. So it can be a bit of a challenge trying to grow Kentucky bluegrass lawn if irrigation is not an option for you out there. And it's got an R beside its name. So that tells us it's a creeping grass that spreads by rhizomes. So that's what the R stands for, rhizomes. And rhizomes are those shoots or stems that run laterally underneath the ground that allows the grass to spread. So Kentucky bluegrass is a creeping grass and it spreads by rhizomes under the ground. Then we have fine fescue. Fine fescues, they're different species of fine fescue. We'll mention those here in just a few minutes. But there are some of the fine fescue that are bunch type grasses and some that are creeping grasses and spread by rhizomes. And then the last category, or the last one in the cool season category, are the ryegrasses. That's perennial and annual ryegrass, and those are bunch grasses. So we shift over to the warm season grass side. The two dominant warm season grasses that we grow in the state are Bermuda grass and zoysia grass. and they both have an R and an S outside their nose. The R again stands for rhizomes, so that tells you that both Bermuda grass and zoysia grass spread laterally underneath the ground via these underground shoots called rhizomes, but they also spread laterally above the ground on the surface by other lateral shoots called stolons. So Bermuda grass and zoysia grass both spread above ground and below ground by rhizomes and stolons. Now, the last two warm season grasses you see listed there, centipede grass and St. Augustine grass, they have an asterisk beside them because they're not maintained in a large number of home lawns in Tennessee, simply because very often they may have cold weather damage concerns, and they're not as well suited for some of the colder temperatures that we can experience here in Tennessee. So those that are being maintained are going to be predominantly in the western part of the state. You'll notice they both have an S beside them, so that tells us that they are creeping grasses that spread above ground by stolons. So all the warm season grasses are creeping grasses, so they spread. Some of the cool season grasses are creeping grasses, but most of the ones that we're going to grow are not creeping grasses. Okay, so those are the grass options that we have as far as potential turfs to grow in home lawns in Tennessee. So let's talk a little bit about how these different grasses grow. All right, so we're going to talk first about cool season grasses. If we chart the growth curve for cool season grasses, we'll see that the weather conditions in the late winter time, in the spring and the fall, when you have those cooler temperatures, really favor the growth of those grasses. The growth chart is charted here, the growth curve is charted here. And you can see the black line represents shoots and the blue line represents roots, and they kind of they lag behind one another just a little bit. But you'll see that you've got a big peak of growth here in the spring of the year. And then as you progress from spring into summer, that growth rate slows really down. And you go into the hot weather months, and boy, growth just really almost stops in many instances. And sometimes it gets hot enough, dry enough, long enough, then those cool season grasses will show some stress. But as we move out of the summer into the late summer, early fall time frame, temperatures cool off again, and you'll see an uptick in their growth. Conversely, warm season grasses grow in the hot weather months. If you chart their growth curve, as you see it listed right here or illustrated right here, you'll see that their peak growth is going to be in the height of the summer. As a matter of fact, they don't really start growing much until, most years around the middle of April or a bit later, till kind of you're sort of past the frost danger. And as the days get shorter as summer progresses into fall, then their growth rate slows down because these warm season grasses, Bermuda grass, zoysia grass, and so on, require a greater number of foot candles of light to grow. So they're a high light using plant compared to the cool season grasses that don't use as much sunlight. And that's another reason that the cool season grasses don't grow so well in the height of the summer, because of all the sunlight there, and that kind of slows down their growth rate. So that's another reason they're cool season. Here's a reason that warm season are called warm season, because they use that light and really grow aggressively in the summertime. So those are the months when you have the most active growth. So for a single grass type, okay, cool season grass, if we flip back and look at their growth curve, cool season grasses will give us the potential for the greatest number of green grass days throughout the course of the year, because they have the longest growing season. And the warm season grasses are going to have the shortest growing season, because they're not going to grow until it warms up in the spring. The soil warms up enough in the spring for them to break dormancy and begin growing, and they go back into dormancy as we transition from summer into fall and winter. Okay. We talked about, or I mentioned, that cool season grasses can suffer in hot, dry conditions. So I have an example lawn right here that illustrates that. The first picture up here in the left-hand corner, boy, that grass, and this was taken in April, that grass looks pretty good. It's got a nice green color. It really stripes nicely when it's being mowed there. And so that, indicates to us that the growing conditions are pretty good in favor of the cool season grass. But as summer goes along, we get over here into August, in the early part of August, and, there's still a good cover of grass out there. And that grass, is still growing some, but you are starting to see some hot spots show up out there. That tells us that, these brown areas, this grass is starting to experience some summertime stress. You'll notice it's not nearly as dense green, dark green, as it was in the first slide, or the first picture there in April. And then down here on the 18th of September, okay, this is the same yard. The top two pictures, we're looking we're standing with our back to the road, looking at the house and shooting in between those two maple trees. Well, here in this bottom picture, September, those are the same two maple trees. We just got our back to the house now, looking back towards the road, shooting between those same two maple trees. From the end of August down here in Middle Tennessee, and I suspect y'all probably suffered from the same circumstances or the same conditions. Somewhere along in the latter part of August, man, it got dry, and we're still dry, and it stayed dry enough long enough till that cool season grass. And by the way, that's a mixture of tall fescue and Kentucky bluegrass in that lawn. It really suffered because there's no irrigation on this lawn right here, and so those cool season grasses are showing that dry weather stress associated with some heat, and more especially just continued or extended dry period. So that's the thing to keep in mind. The cool season grasses will very often show examples of that hot weather stress. Now, warm season grasses, they love the heat, but they're not perfect either, because they like the heat and we don't stay hot all year long. And so it does get cold. You look at this image here, this is Bermuda grass, and that's kind of an unusual appearance to it. It's got a kind of a mottled mosaic appearance where you've got patches of brown, but all these, these green squiggly lines running through it. Well, if you don't like the way that looks, then probably in Montgomery County and around Clarksville, Tennessee, places like that, you may not want to grow warm season grass, especially Bermuda grass, because at some point it will look like that. And all that is just annual frost damage. That's the frost pattern. After a frost that was not heavy enough to put all of that whole population of Bermuda grass into dormancy, but it's starting to go into dormancy. So you have patches that are dormant or going dormant, patches that are not, and so it gives it that kind of an unusual mosaic appearance. But eventually, when the frost becomes heavy enough, then all of those warm season grasses, that entire population, regardless of the species you're using, is going to turn brown. And it's not dead. Okay, there's no active growth taking place above ground, but that plant isn't dead. But it's no longer photosynthetically active. It doesn't have any chlorophyll in those upper shoots, so it's not growing, but it's brown. So if you don't like that brown color throughout the late fall and the winter until it breaks dormancy in the spring of the year, then you don't choose a warm season grass. I want to point out some other characteristics of these grasses. All the warm season grasses are creepy. Okay, and I mentioned that they spread by stolons above ground and rhizomes below ground, and some of the cool season grasses, like Kentucky bluegrass and like a couple of the fine fescues, are also creepy grasses that spread by rhizomes below ground. Well, here's what these things look like. The above the picture on the top, or the example on the top of this slide, is a Bermuda grass stolon. And that's that shoot that runs laterally across the surface of the ground that allows it to spread that way. And the one on the bottom is an example of a zoysia grass rhizome. And that's the shoot underground, the stem underground that runs laterally and allows those plants to spread underground. Okay. So the thing to keep in mind about those warm season grasses, or creeping grasses in general, but especially the warm season grasses, is they do creep. Now, here in this slide, you see an example of just common Bermuda grass, and those are above ground stolons. And what are they doing? Well, they're creeping across this curve, and it looks like they're going to crawl up into and creep into a flower bed or a landscape bed. When you're selecting a grass species or grass type to grow in your home lawn, you need to take into account how these grasses grow, because this can be a maintenance issue. I want not necessarily an issue, as long as you're aware of it. You know that to keep these grasses out of your flower beds or landscaped areas, that you've got to do some fairly aggressive edging to keep those above ground stolons and below ground rhizomes from running over and starting to grow in those areas where you don't want them to. Now, if you allow this grass to get ahead of you and to get into those flower beds and whatnot, you'll always have a job, and that job is going out and pulling, Bermuda grass out of the flower beds. It's not much fun, but boy, once it gets established, it's very difficult to get it out of there. So you think about that on the front end of it. If you don't want to be concerned about edging and whatnot, then you don't choose a warm season creeping grass like Bermuda grass. So it's a grass creeps off, though it's not as aggressive. And it's, it doesn't grow as fast as Bermuda grass does, but it still can do the same thing. So conversely, those that have creeping grasses grow. So the bunch grasses are called bunch grasses because they grow in a bunch. Here's an example of individual tall fescue plants, bunch grasses. And of course, we don't plant a yard like this at this low population density, but this is done just to illustrate to you what bunch grass, what that means. Those are mature grass plants. Those clumps aren't going to get any bigger, or they aren't going to get much bigger over time. They stay where you put them. They don't creep over into flower beds or unwanted areas. They grow, those bunches expand slowly over time by the addition of these shoots called tillers. Here's an example of what a tiller looks like. Those are the side shoots that are coming off there of the main stem. And it'll do those grasses will put those tillers on, on a yearly basis until, they get so big, they're not going to get any bigger than that. Okay, so that's kind of the difference between the warm season grasses and the cool season grasses and creeping grasses and bunch grasses. But so we've talked about the different kind of grass and the things you need to take into account when you're choosing them. But before you get too far into this, are you sure that your lawn, your site, is going to support year-round grass growth? I mean, is that even a potential for you on your particular site? Some things you got to consider. Turfgrass plants are just like any other plants. They have needs, and all sites, all lawns don't meet those needs. Probably one of the most important ones is they've got to have room to grow below or room to produce roots. This set of these slides right here, okay, these chambers are showing you, that's just grass being grown in soil columns. They've got a plexiglass cover on the front of it to show you how deep roots can grow. Okay, they've got the ability to send roots very deeply into the soil if nothing obstructs their growth. If there's not some obstruction down there, be a rock or hardpan or whatnot, that will inhibit that root growth from reaching down deep into the soil. Deeper rooted turfs are stronger and better able to withstand dry periods than are more shallow rooted turfs. Those turfs that grow on on shallow soils that are more shallow rooted are going to show, or be the first ones to show, drought damage. Regardless of what the grass around it looks like, those are growing on shallow soil. When it gets hot and dry, those cool season grasses or warm season grasses, either one, they're going to start showing that stress, much sooner. Here's a prime example. In this picture, we've got a brown rectangle, the grass all around the rectangle, still nice and green. But why is that grass brown over that rectangle? What is that rectangle? Well, that's the top of a septic tank. That's a septic tank cover. And the reason that grass is brown right there is because that soil is very shallow. It's just, a couple or 3 inches deep over the top of that. That soil dries out. That grass is very shallow rooted because it can't extend down into the soil because it's sitting on top basically of a man-made rock. And so it's got a very shallow root system. When it gets dry, that little bit of soil on top of that septic tank lid dries out, and that grass starts to show that weather stress, that dry stress very rapidly. Now, here's another example. Here's a clump of grass that was growing out in amongst a nice population of turf grass, and this clump is brown, but the grass growing all around it was nice and green. So why is it doing that? Well, we take a rod and a probe and run that into the ground. It only goes a couple of inches, and boom, it's on one of these good Middle Tennessee flat limestone rocks. We dig that clump up and turn it over, and look, it's got a good root mass on there. But where are those roots going? They're all running horizontal, growing laterally. There's nothing growing down because they can't grow down because they've got an obstruction. So the point is, you've got to have, your site has to have enough soil depth without some obstruction that's going to inhibit root growth down into the ground to give that grass the best chance of year-round survival. And 6 inches is the bare minimum. Boy, if all you've got 6 inches, it's still going to be a challenge because that thin ground's going to dry out faster than deep ground will. But something to keep in mind: evaluate your site before you try to grow grass on it. And if you don't have enough soil to grow grass, maybe think about doing something else. Another thing to consider is sunlight. Okay, think about sunlight. Some grasses, like Bermuda grass and Kentucky woodgrass, they require full sun, and that's 6 or more hours of good bright sunlight every day. But now some will tolerate some moderate shade. For example, tall fescue will tolerate moderate shade. It doesn't need that shade to survive, but it will tolerate it. And some of the zoysia grass species or varieties, they require full sun, but some will tolerate moderate shade very well. whereas Bermuda grass will not tolerate that shade at all. Perennial ryegrass, for example, it'll tolerate some moderate shade. But then some grasses, for example, like the fine fescues, they need some degree of shade. In this example, this is at one of the state parks. You can see that fine textured grass growing down here in these shady places. Those are fine fescues that are being maintained on this shaded roadway here in one of the state parks. And those fine fescues need some sun. They don't survive very well, or excuse me, they need some shade. They don't survive very well in the full sun. Now, they do need sun, okay, because they are green plants and they got to catch sunlight in order for photosynthesis to take place, in order for them to grow, but they don't need as much. And so therefore they need that filtered sunlight coming through the shade. So you got to think about that. Does your area, does your site provide enough sunlight, even if it's filtered, to give grass the amount of light it needs to grow? The thing to keep in mind is if your site has really dense shade and it has very little even filtered sunlight going through it, you might want to consider options other than growing turfgrass out there. As I said, these grass plants have got needs like other plants. We talked about the soil depth, room to grow roots, adequate sunlight, enough to grow. Sometimes you have to choose between trees or grass. It's very difficult to modify soil depth. It's difficult to modify shade unless you do remove the source of the shade. Sometimes that's trees. You might want to do that. Now, the other thing, that these sufficient water. Well, you very well may be able to supply irrigation, so you can affect that. And grasses, like other plants, need anywhere from 2 to 4 square meals throughout the course of the year. Well, you can provide that through fertilizer, and they also need freedom from excessive competition. Especially from weeds. Well, you can have an impact on that. You can reduce competition. But so that's 3 things we can influence. You can influence those in your home lawn, but we can't do much about not having enough soil depth or the amount of sunlight we get. So let's consider then in those areas where you don't get enough sunlight, you don't have enough soil depth. What else can you do there? Well, those are potential candidates for other landscaping options. You look at this big old tree out there. I mean, this thing looks, it's a big, impressive tree. It's got big old limbs. It spreads out, and it's like a really inviting place. Well, with all that shade out there, it's going to be difficult to maintain a good dense stand of turf grass, possibly year-round out there. And another thing to keep in mind, not just the shade aspect, but that tree's got a lot of roots up in that upper, 8-9 inches of soil. And it's in that same zone where grass roots would be. So the grass roots and the tree roots are competing for the same water, the same nutrients, and so on. So it's not only a lack of sunlight, but it's also a competition between the trees and the turf grass. So maybe instead of trying to grow grass there, that's a good candidate for a large mulch area or some other hardscape features that you might consider to use in those shady areas. Here's another example of a nice big mulch ring around a tree, a big massive tree that's going to put off enough shade to maybe inhibit turf grass growth. So nothing says you've got to try to grow grass just because you've got trees out there. Other things can look pretty nice as well. And if you'll stop trying to grow grass in places that don't support grass growth, then maybe your frustration level at trying to grow grass can drop a little bit. But then you've got plants that like shade, that need shade, ornamental plants, like these hostas you see pictured here, or maybe use some hardscape features, like some nice edging or some, some stepping stones, some benches, nice place to come sit and just contemplate the world, just relax in a nice shady spot, and you're not stressing out because, man, this area won't grow grass, so do something else with it. But also, these shady places or areas that aren't suited for growing grass, they might be a good place for you to put your giant rooster statue. And it's important that we support the yard art industry out there because if people don't buy those things and use them, then man, it's hard for them to make a living. They go out of business, and it's just hard on the economy. So just think about choosing the right kinds of places to try to grow grass, and those that won't grow grass, do something else out there. Use some of those other landscape possibilities, and just save yourself the frustration. Okay, so let's talk about the specific characteristics of some of these different turf grass options that we have in Tennessee. The first one I mentioned right off the bat, the cool season side, is tall fescue, specifically turf type tall fescue. It's by far the most frequently used cool season turf grass in the state. It's going to be a coarse to medium coarse textured bunch grass, and texture refers to the blade width, how wide the blade is. So you can see, this is a good population. This is a picture of a good dense population of tall fescue growing out there in a sunny spot. It has medium shade tolerance. It will grow in some moderate shade, but it doesn't need shade, but it will grow there. But it has pretty good wear and drought resistance. Now, notice this was specified as turf type tall fescue. So when you say turf type, so then you wonder, okay, is there some that's not turf type and some that is? Yes, that's the case. In this slide, you see pictured here, the grass, the block of grass on the left of the picture, and it's got the label up there, Kentucky 31 tall fescue. That is traditional tall fescue. It is not a turf type tall fescue. Notice when you compare it to the turf type tall fescue, that darker green fescue to the right of it, you can sure see some differences in those grasses. The turf type is going to be a darker green color. In many cases, the turf type tall fescues will have a finer leaf texture, meaning their leaf blades aren't as wide as the old traditional Kentucky 31 type tall fescue is. So that's what it's talking about, or when you hear the term turf type tall fescue. And the turf type fescues very often will have, or generally will have, some improved characteristics, not just color, not just texture, but maybe recovery from disease, ability to recover from disease, and to withstand, disease pressure, and things like that. So next up then on the cool season side is Kentucky bluegrass. It is a medium to medium fine textured rhizomatous creeping grass, and rhizomes creep underground. Boy, this grass is very uniform. Look at that population of Kentucky bluegrass right there, and all those blades are very uniform. They're all the same width, and so it has a very uniform color, very uniform texture, but it has a much higher water use rate and a lower drought tolerance than tall fescue has. So if your goal is to try to grow Kentucky bluegrass on your home lawn site, having irrigation there is really going to improve your chances of success a great deal. And, very little shade, because Kentucky bluegrass has lower shade tolerance than the tall fescue or the fine fescues have, so they grow very well in shade. And so speaking of fine fescues, here's an example. Now you can see in the picture there how fine or how narrow those leaf blades are. And all the fine fescues exhibit a very narrow leaf blade. But there are multiple species of the fine fescue. You see chewing fescue. Okay, it's a bunch grass. Hard fescue, that's another bunch grass. Sheep fescue is a bunch grass. Then there are two creeping fine fescues, one called slender creeping red, and then one called strong creeping red. Very often, folks that are trying to grow grass in those sites that have fair moderate shade will use a mixture of two or three of the different fine fescue species together, like some chewing and some hard and some strong creeping red fescue in a mixture to grow in that shady environment. But those are the most shade tolerant grasses that we have available to us. Then from the ryegrass standpoint, perennial ryegrass is a medium textured bunch grass, but it has very low drought tolerance, has very low shade and heat tolerance. But it has so for us, where we live here in Tennessee in the transition zone, very often it's not a true perennial. It doesn't persist as a good dense population. If you were to sow, a yard in or a lawn in, just pure perennial ryegrass out in the heat of the summer, and when it does get hot and dry, it's going to be very likely that you'll see areas of that just going away. It's just not going to survive out there. But it does have fairly decent wear resistance. So the primary use in our part of the world for perennial ryegrass is a high quality overseeding option for dormant Bermuda grass in order to give it some green color throughout the growing season or throughout the dormant season for those individuals that have Bermuda grass lawns that don't want to see the brown color throughout the wintertime. It's also used in cool season seed mixes sometimes, mixed in with maybe a little bluegrass and a little tall fescue. And very often it's done because it'll germinate very quickly and establish quickly. But anyway, that's your perennial ryegrass. The name says perennial, but where we live, it is not necessarily a good, strong perennial. And that brings up the last ryegrass. That's annual ryegrass, and it is absolutely an annual. Annual ryegrass is a winter annual. It's a coarse textured annual bunch grass, but it's used as a temporary grass. It's going to be temporary because it's an annual and it's going to die. You sow it in the fall of the year, it germinates, grows throughout the wintertime. As spring progresses and it gets a little warmer, days get a little longer, it starts to get real skinny and real leggy and not very much vegetative growth on it, and it just fades away. It's a cheaper overseeding option on dormant Bermuda grass than perennial ryegrass is, simply because it's not as high quality, it's coarser textured, it's not as dark green, it's more of got a little bit of a yellow green look to it, and it has kind of a slick appearance to it as well. So it's just not as high quality in many people's opinion as an overseeding option, but it's a good temporary grass, though. It will germinate very quickly. So now we shift over to the warm season grasses. Bermuda grass, it's an extremely aggressive, very durable creeping turf grass. And it can range in texture anywhere from the medium texture to very fine. There's a lot of variation from one variety to another. It has great heat and wear resistance, and it has outstanding drought tolerance, but has very poor shade tolerance. And it's, fairly cold tolerant for the most years. We don't have significant enough cold weather to really strongly damage large populations of Bermuda grass. Yes, we do have some cold weather damage some years in the wintertime, but we don't typically lose, large populations of Bermuda grass. Now, there are different varieties of Bermuda grass. Some are they have to be propagated vegetatively, meaning that those grasses don't produce enough viable seed, or the seed they do produce is sterile, so that seed can't be harvested, and this grass established from seed. You can't buy these particular kinds of Bermuda grass seed and establish them. They have to be, sodded or sprigged or plugged or whatnot. Here's a couple of examples. One called Latitude 36, one called Tiflay. But there are a number of seeded varieties of Bermuda grass that are, very high quality. And these have been derived from the old wild common Bermuda grass. But they've been bred to have more desirable turf type qualities, and they can make a very high quality Bermuda grass lawn. Here's an example of a seeded variety called Riviera Bermuda grass. And here's common Bermuda grass. If you've got Bermuda grass growing anywhere on your property, you didn't plant it, folks that lived there before you didn't plant it, it's common Bermuda grass. And it's out there, it's aggressive. Bermuda grass is hard to kill. Once you get a population of it growing in an area, you don't want it there. Again, you generally always have something to do. If you run out of things to do, you go out and fight for Bermuda grass. So it's pretty tough to totally eradicate it from the area. I would never say that you can eradicate it long term. You can certainly suppress it, and you can grow other grasses, in that area. But I don't know that's ever eradicated. You have to be on your guard and be ready to take steps to keep it from coming back on you. Zoysia grass, then, is the other most commonly used warm season grass we have in the state. Again, it's a durable, heat-loving, creeping turf grass spread by rhizomes and stolons. It's slower growing than Bermuda grass. It's not as aggressive in that regard. From a texture standpoint, it can range anywhere from medium to fine texture. It has, depending on the variety or the species, there's multiple species of zoysia grass. It can range from medium to very high wear and drought resistance. And it has extremely good cold resistance, and it has high heat tolerance. From a shade tolerance standpoint, some of those varieties fall into the medium shade tolerant range, kind of like the tall fescue does. It has much greater shade tolerance, or some varieties have much greater shade tolerance than does Bermuda grass. So if you want to grow a warm season grass and you've got some moderate shade in the yard, some of these Bermuda grass varieties like Palisades or Meyer can be options to think about growing, those grasses in those shady places. Now, just like Bermuda grass, some zoysia grass cultivars varieties don't produce enough seed to be harvested, so they have to be propagated vegetatively. Here's an example of one of those, Meyer's zoysia grass. But there are a few varieties that can be established from seed. The most common one you're apt to run across is one called Zenith. And here's an example of Zenith zoysia grass, which is a seeded variety. Centipede grass is again, centipede and St. Augustine grass aren't grown a whole lot in the state, more so in the western part of Tennessee. Centipede is a coarse texture, very coarse texture. It's a heat tolerant creeping turf grass, but it has very low drought and wear resistance, and it has low shade tolerance. It has high heat tolerance, but it has, kind of, it's in the low to medium range for cold tolerance. But one thing it has going for it is that it's a very low input grass. It doesn't require very much fertility as compared to some of the other grasses. So, if you want to try to grow a warm season grass in an area that you're not really concerned about, having super high quality, and you don't want a lot of inputs in terms of fertilizer, this centipede grass might be one to think about. And probably this one seen right here, this is a seeded centipede grass variety that's been bred to survive in colder temperatures. It came out probably 14, 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago. By now, time gets away. But it's called Tiflair, and it was bred in Georgia to be a cold tolerant variety. It's possibly the best choice for a centipede grass here for somebody to try to grow in Tennessee. As a matter of fact, I've got a plot of this Tiflair centipede grass that I've been growing here at our extension office in Murfreesboro for going on about 10 or 12 years now. It's survived very well at this point. And the last one we'll talk about is St. Augustine grass. St. Augustine grass is a very coarse textured creeping turf grass. It has medium wear and drought resistance. But compared to the other warm season grasses, even compared to zoysia grass, it probably has the greatest shade tolerance of any warm season grass out there. But it doesn't produce seed or enough viable seed to be harvested, so it has to be propagated vegetatively, either through plugs or from sod. Here's an example of some Raleigh St. Augustine grass. This past spring, I went up to a research farm there in Knoxville, and they've been growing some St. Augustine grass, that's Raleigh St. Augustine, for a few years. They've been surviving, so I took some plugs from there, brought them back to Murfreesboro back in May, and establish a plot of the St. Augustine grass here at the extension office. So it has grown in very well, and it'll be interesting to see how it survives down here. But, right now, St. Augustine grass is not being used much in the state of Tennessee. Now, then keep in mind, or a question that sometimes people ask. So it seems like the answer to growing green grass year round is grow a combination of warm season and cool season grasses. Can you do that? Well, you decide that. Okay, you decide that, because remember, back to this slide from this cool season grass. At certain times of the year, those cool season grasses are going to show some stress. Okay, like in this hot weather stretch you see right here. But in other times of the year, the warm season grasses, like this Bermuda grass, will certainly show its winter dormancy. So here's an example. There's that same yard. It was showing that stress earlier. Okay, the front half of that yard is established in cool season grass. The back half, or depending on how you look at it, the one half is in cool season grass, the other half is in warm season grass, but one half's got a fair amount of shade on it, the other half is full of sun. So when one of those species is dormant or showing stress, it's very obvious that you don't have a good uniform appearance. Okay, now at certain times of the year, like when both these grasses are growing well, yeah, it can look pretty nice. But in times of the year when one is struggling and or when one is dormant, then it's very obvious that you don't have a good uniform standing grass. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you think, okay, I will grow a perennial warm season grass and a perennial cool season grass together. And here's another example of an individual growing some Bermuda grass and tall fescue. This picture was taken in December. So the Bermuda grass is dormant, tall fescue is growing pretty good right there, and he's got a nice striped yard. Okay, so we talked about the different grasses, different characteristics, and so on of those. So you make a choice. You decide, all right, this site will grow grass, so you decide that it will grow grass, and so you're going to establish it out there. When you think about starting a new yard, a new yard is one that you have most control of. And when I say the most control, you have the opportunity to make the greatest impact on improving the soil quality on that particular site if it needs to be improved. Do you need to add more organic matter to improve soil tilt? Well, this is the time to do it during the construction phase. You want to ensure that the topsoil that has been moved during the excavation process or the building process doesn't leave the site. If topsoil has got to be pushed out of the way, then push it up in a pile and stockpile it. Don't let it get away from them. And then after all the construction is done and you're getting ready to build the yard, to establish the lawn, that topsoil needs to be graded back out uniformly back across the yard. This is the time you're going to add organic matter to it. Good compost is an excellent thing to improve quality and tilt of that soil, and to add organic matter back to it. You can add 2 or 3 inches of good compost out there and mix that, kill it into the topsoil. to a depth of 2 to 4 to 6 inches if you can. And also you would add in your starter fertilizer as your soil test suggested that you needed during that establishment phase. You're also going to take out any debris out there, like stones, rocks, building debris, etc., out of that top 4 inches or so of soil. So you want a nice, good, flat, smooth, uniform planting surface. Folks, that's not a good planting surface. On a new construction site, it's not uncommon to see things like that. So you want to make sure that all that debris and whatnot is just not buried under the surface of the ground, because then when it comes time, to try to plant that grass out there, to lay the sod, whatever you're going to do, you may have areas that don't grow so well simply because you've got a thin soil layer sitting on top of a bunch of junk that was buried out there in that yard during the construction phase. A planting bed on a new yard needs to be firm, and a way to gauge firmness is to walk across it. If you make footprints that are deeper than a half inch, then that's ground a little bit soft, and you may want to firm it up a little bit. And the reason I say that is, these grass seed don't have to be buried deeply in the ground. And if the soil is too loose, it may be a little easier for those seed to be buried a little bit too deeply. And also, if it's really loose and fine, after that grass seed is sowed out there and it comes to rain on it, it may have a really finely powdery soil, may have a tendency to crust on the surface, and it may impede those grass seedlings when they try to germinate to poke through because of that hard crust out there. So if a bed is too soft, how do you firm it up? Well, a roller is a good way to firm it up. A weighted roller is a good tool to use, prepare a good, smooth, firm planting surface for your turf grass. And depending on the roller, it's also a great way to get some good exercise. So keep that in mind. If you're looking for exercise, a roller might be an option for you. Some folks might view it as torture, but I don't know. So when it comes to establishing grasses, I've already alluded to this. We've got just really a very few ways to do it. We can sow seed. All right, we can broadcast seed out there. We can lay sod. Okay. Both warm season grasses and cool season grasses can be established from sod. All the cool season grasses can be established from seed. Some of the warm season grasses can be established from seed. But you also hear folks talk about plugging. Okay, well, what is a plug? Well, a plug is just a small piece of sod. That's what it is. So it's really, here's an example. I told you that I had gotten some plugs of St. Augustine grass and established those in a plot here at Lancaster Park, my office in Murfreesboro. Well, there it is. That's the St. Augustine grass. And the plugs are just nothing more than just small pieces of sod, or relatively small pieces of sod that have been cut out. Very often you purchase plugs for like zoysia grass and whatnot. You'll see advertised. You'll get like 2-inch plugs. And so those plugs can be used to establish creeping grasses. You can't use plugs to establish bunch grass. You set a plug of bunch grass in the ground, and it'll only grow so far. It's not going to spread out and fill in the gaps between the plugs the way those creeping grasses do. You may also hear the term sprigging, and that is used for warm season grasses, primarily Bermuda grass, and sprigs are really just basically pieces of stolon, those above ground runners that those Bermuda grass puts out on top of the ground that have been harvested, and it's like planting a potato. A potato, you can cut a potato into sections. As long as it has an eye, that section has an eye in it, then it's got the potential to produce a new plant. Well, these stolons, when they're harvested as sprigs, they have nodes or joints along those stolons. Well, every one of those nodes has the potential to produce a new grass plant, if you plant those out there. So sprigging is another option, but it's commonly done on very large areas. It's not done much on a home lawn. So primarily you're going to use either sprig or, you're either going to sow seed or put down sod, and in some instances, maybe plug to establish turf grass on a new lawn. When it comes to seeding turf grass, that there are different seeding rates. How much seed you use per unit of area. In lawn care, we very often speak in units of 1,000 square feet. So this diagram gives you an idea of how much grass seed you need. The cool season grasses for the fescues, anywhere from 5 to 8 pounds of seed per 1,000 square feet. They're a fairly large grass seed. The fescues are. Compare that to Kentucky bluegrass, where you're talking 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds of seed per 1,000 feet. Well, it doesn't take less seed. It's just a smaller seed. Kentucky bluegrass is a smaller seed. And so it doesn't take as many seed to equal the same number of seed per 1,000 square feet with tall fescue, or the fescue. That's the tall fescue and the fine fescue compared to Kentucky bluegrass, but it's much smaller seed. Perennial ryegrass anywhere from 4 to 6 pounds per 1,000 feet. The warm season grasses, look at that, anywhere from a half to a pound for Bermuda grass, a half to 3 pounds for centipede grass, or a half to 3 pounds for Georgia grass. And that tells you those are small seeds. Okay. Bermuda grass, and there's an asterisk down here, a notation that says double the rate when planting unhulled Bermuda grass, or Bermuda grass still has a husk on it. So in unhulled Bermuda grass, okay, to give you an idea how small it is, that unhulled Bermuda grass seed has roughly a million, 1.7 million seed in a pound. Hulled Bermuda grass is going to have somewhere like 2.1 million seed in a pound. So that gives you an idea how small those grass seeds are. And that's why it doesn't require many pounds of seed to give you enough to cover the area out there. Okay, once that grass is planted, how long or how soon can you expect germination to take place? This chart just gives you an idea on these cool seeding grasses, Kentucky bluegrass, and you'll notice this on the very small seeding grass. The smaller the seed, typically the longer it takes to germinate. So for Kentucky bluegrass, that really small seed, it tells you that it can take anywhere from 14 to 21 or more days to germinate, and the preferred germination temperature, soil temperature, is in that 59 to 86 degrees range. You compare that to tall fescue, 6 to 12 days or so, and it likes to germinate at 68 to 86 degree range. But look at the ryegrass, both perennial and annual ryegrass. It can germinate in as few as 3 days in that 68 to 86 degree temperature soil. So there's some variation in how long it takes the grass seed to germinate, and that's assuming, under good conditions. The soil is warm enough, and there's adequate moisture available throughout the germination period to allow that grass seed to soak in the water and start it to swell and begin that germination process. Conversely, on the warm season side, this gives you an idea of the germination period. And again, every one of these, with the exception of zoysia grass, it's listed as 20 days or more, 10 to 20 days. But my experience has been that it tends to be closer to the high side versus the low side of that. And my personal experience with zoysia grass, growing Zenith zoysia grass from seed, it was certainly exceeded that 14 days limit to germinate. And again, look at the temperatures, preferred temperature, 65 to 90 degrees. These aren't frost tolerant plants, and you will be past frost danger when you plant those from seed. So the point is, don't plant grass seed today and go out and expect to see it coming up in the next day or two, unless it's ryegrass. And then, 2 or 3 days, it's sure possible to see it starting to peek through a little bit. But the other seeds, they're going to take, it's just going to take longer for them to germinate. So when do we grow these grasses? When's the time to plant them? So in Tennessee, the preferred time to plant these cool seeding turfgrass seed is in late summer and early fall, when the air temperatures favor seed germination and seedling growth. In the higher elevation of the state, it may start a little bit earlier than it does in the lower elevations, towards West Tennessee. But kind of the sweet spot for most of us in Tennessee to try to establish cool seeding grasses from seed is in that September through October time frame. And now, can you plant grass seed, tall fescue, and other cool seeding grasses in the spring of the year? Well, yeah, this is America. It's yours. You can do that if you want to. And if you plant, tall fescue and other cool seeding grasses, say in March and April, there's a very good likelihood you're going to get germination of. But the difference between those fall planted grasses and the spring planted cool seeding grasses is, you think about back to when or the temperature ranges that the cool seeding grasses grow roots. They'll grow a root under the ground at soil temperatures down to near freezing. Okay, so how many days do we have between September and June when our soil temperatures are above freezing? We have a lot of days. Okay, so there's a lot of days for those cool season grasses that are planted in the fall of the year to be developing a root system. You compare that to those cool season grasses planted in the spring, say in the March and April time frame, they have many fewer days to grow a root system before we start getting into the higher temperatures associated with late spring and early summer, and that late May and June, July period. And so because it is getting hot, and those grasses are naturally going to be stressed out some. And those that are less mature, that haven't developed as much, aren't able to withstand the stress as well as those that have had more time to grow in and be established. So that's why that fall, that late summer, fall, September, October is kind of the sweet spot for establishing cool season grasses from seed. From a sod standpoint, this September, October, November is not a bad time. That's a good season to establish from sod. Okay, because it's not having germinate from seed, so we're not worried about that so much. But growing conditions are good for it to be putting down roots into, from a temperature standpoint, are good to be putting down roots into the soil profile. And then again, spring of the year, in maybe March through May or through early May, is another good period for sodding cool season grasses. You're probably not going to be able to sod much cool season grass in the heat of the summer, and simply because sod growers won't cut it for you. They know it's not going to work very well, and they're going to stress their fields out, and you're not going to cut it for you and then say, oh, man, this didn't work, and come back and listen to people fussing about it. Conversely, the warm season grasses, they're not frost tolerant. So we're going to plant those when the danger of frost is pretty much past. So for most of the state, that's going to be, once you get past the early part of May, we're not worried too much about frost. So kind of the sweet spot is May through, the very early part of July. This is to plant it from seed, and we want the grass. We want those hot weather grasses, warm season grasses, have enough time to plant them early enough in that late spring to summer time frame to have time to grow and develop before their growth slows down going into the fall season. Because just like cool season grasses can suffer from hot weather stress if they're planted, in the spring of the year, they don't have time to grow and develop. Well, those warm season grasses that are planted too late in the summer may not have enough time to develop a good root system before it gets cool and potentially suffer from cold weather damage because they haven't had time to grow that root system. So from a seeding standpoint, kind of May through the early part of July. For sod, I guess technically Bermuda grass or zoysia grass, warm season sod can be planted or installed. You're not really planting it, but it can be installed, anytime the ground's not frozen. So that means even when it's dormant. But if you can find a sod grower that will cut dormant sod, it's not going to grow and really do much in the way of establishing itself until conditions get right for it to break dormancy and start growing. So you're taking a bit of a risk, I guess, by doing that. Probably the better time to do that is going to be in that kind of March through August, March through July time frame. Just want to give it time to grow, and you want it to be an active growing stage to give it the best opportunity to develop, I guess, and to establish itself. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, getting tongue-tied. When you plant grass seed, is it important that it be covered very deeply? No, but the main thing is that it be in good contact with the soil. And a good way to ensure this contact is to roll the area with a laded roller after the grass seed has been planted, just to press it down into that upper soil surface. After grass seed is planted on bare ground, you need to cover it with something. You need to mulch it. It's not a bad idea because mulch can help conserve moisture around the plants and hold or not around the plants, but around the seeds and help them to germinate, so you conserve moisture. It can also limit seed from floating away in cases of heavy rain. Kind of help stabilize things there a little bit. If you use sweet straw, that's fine. That's a good option out there because it's going to decompose over time and add organic matter back to the soil. How much straw does it take? The goal is to not cover the ground so you can't see the ground. But so you still want to be able to see soil through the straw, but you want to have a fairly uniform cover across it. So kind of a rule of thumb, I guess, is 50 pounds of straw, you ought to be able to cover 1,000 square feet of yard space with that. Okay, straw, it may blow, and that's okay. If it does blow, you kind of rake it back out a little bit. If you irrigate it, if you sprinkle it on a regular basis, you'll keep it damp, and it's not as prone to blow on windy days and things like that. Straw is not the only option though in terms of using a mulch cover. You can use things like peat moss, for example, or other organic material. Here's an example of an area here at Lane Agri Park. Now this isn't a new lawn per se, but it's an area that was taken out of an old grass, and so it was killed and new grass sown into it. And after the seed was broadcast, then we covered the seeded area with a thin layer of this compost, this organic material. It's not compost, it's peat moss. And it acts like a mulch blanket again to help hold moisture in around that, to cover it some. And it may minimize some seed loss due to the bird feeding. They might pick up some of the seed out there. Maybe some insects might eat a few of them, but this can just kind of help serve as a mulch blanket. This is just a little top dresser tool that's used to spread organic material like compost and peat moss over areas when you're going to use that as a cover on seeded areas. When sod is installed, a thing to keep up, sod is a perishable product, and ideally it should be installed within 48 hours after harvest. So that means that when the sod is delivered to your site to be installed, if you choose to use sod, then the seed bed needs to be ready. So you prepare a seed bed for sod just like you would for, in a perfect world, just like you do it for sowing seed in the first place. And if you're going to install the sod yourself, okay, make sure that you install it with good tight seams. You don't leave exposed edges. Okay, edges of newly installed sod that aren't touching, they're exposed to the atmosphere. Air can circulate around. It can dry out very quickly. And also, if you leave open spaces, bare soil open spaces in between sections of sod, your soil has seed in it. And it's not seed you planted, so it's weed seed, stuff like that, like crabgrass and whatnot. So you see examples here of that exposed soil where crabgrass is starting to germinate in the cracks left because that sod was not laid tightly together. So that's something to keep in mind. When you lay sod or sod is laid, those pieces need to be touching each other, butted up for a good tight seam, not open spaces in between them. So you get grass installed, you have to take care of it. So now we're talking about maintenance practices. So the maintenance practices can be divided into primary practices and secondary practices. Primary practices are mowing, feeding, irrigating. Why are they called primary? Because we do them more often. Then we have the secondary practices of aerifying, dethatching, top dressing, and then pest control, which is, a big part of the pest control that we do in home lawns is weed control. And we do that to reduce competition. So let's talk about maintenance for just a minute. Mowing is the one that we do most often. Not everybody loves to mow, and some people have bad experiences mowing. Looks like this gentleman right here is not having the best day. Hopefully your experiences with mowing aren't as bad as this fellow's. But when it comes to mowing, every grass variety out there, cool seeding grasses, warm seeding grasses, and the individual species have recommended mowing heights. And these have been established over time by watching how these grasses respond and at different mowing heights. And the goal is to try to maintain those grasses within the recommended range, because mowing does stress the grass. It cuts off leaf tissue was being used to catch sunlight and perform photosynthesis. So when those are cut off, and it stresses the grass a little bit, the grass has to use some stored energy from the root system until it puts out some new leaf tissue and starts catching that sunlight again. It gets over the shock of being, defoliated, if you will, to a certain extent. It starts producing energy. So you can see listed here, and this information is in your Master Gardener Turfgrass manual. Okay, so it's there. So don't worry about trying to write all this stuff down or whatnot. It's in that. That's a pretty good little book you've got there, that Turfgrass section in your Master Gardener handbook. But you'll see that there are mowing heights for good growing conditions, depending on the grass that we're talking about, as well as for more poor growing conditions. And the rule of thumb is when conditions aren't as favorable for grass to grow, then we're going to raise the mowing height. And for tall fescue, for example, for in a good growing condition or a good environment, that cool, humid environment, got good moisture, it's cool, down in the 2 to 3 inch range. I don't know many people I don't know anybody really that tries to maintain tall fescue in the 3 inch range, even in the best time of the year. Personally, I don't do it in my lawn. I don't do it on the turf plots here at Lane Agri Park. But I tend to maintain those a little bit higher. And then conversely, on the hot, dry conditions, then that's poor growing conditions for tall fescue. Then the book recommendation is 2.5, 3.5 inches. You can go higher than that. We'll do it here. Typically maintain on the lowest side. During the good growth conditions, we keep our tall fescue about 3.5 inches on the low end, and then under the stress periods of hot weather, it may be up as high as 4.5 inches. And the reason for doing that is the more grass you have above ground, the more shade it gives to the soil, and that can slow down, water loss just by shading the ground a little bit. But there's mowing heights for each of the grass species for the varieties. But look at the warm season grasses; those can be mowed for the most part at lower heights of cut than many of the cool season grasses can. I mean, you look at hybrid Bermuda grass, 3/4 of an inch, or zoysia grass, 3/4 of an inch, centipede grass, an inch. Okay. Now, just think how flat a lawn has to be in order to cut grass that closely. Many of us don't have a lawn that's level enough, flat enough to mow at anything less than an inch, much less lower than 2 inches, simply because we have so much unevenness out there. We're scalping areas in the yard. But the point is, you want to try to maintain those grasses within those recommended mowing heights, not trying to cut off more than you're supposed to. And I go back to this illustration. There's a direct correlation between the amount of above ground growth, the amount of stems you have above ground, and the amount of roots you have below ground. Because not only does this illustrate to you that how deeply grasses can root in the ground if there aren't obstructions there, but look at the length of the grass on top of those columns. The one that has the deepest roots is the one that has the tallest height of cut. So cutting grass at the lowest height of cut is going to have an influence on the root mass below ground, and cutting at the higher side of the height of cut is going to have a positive influence on the amount of root mass you have below ground. So keep that in mind. You may hear the 1/3 rule referred to. All that means is the goal is to remove no more than 1/3 of the grass blade length when you mow. Sometimes that's difficult to do because you have to mow frequently to maintain that, and weather gets in the way. It does not allow you to maybe mow as often as you want to. And if it's good growing conditions, then the grass will forgive you sometime. But the point is, you don't want to make a habit of removing an excessive amount of grass every time you mow. But that certainly will stress the grass. If you do that often enough, then you're going to really start causing that grass to use stored energy out of the root system. And you do that all summer long, then you've got a grass that does not have as much energy stored up going into the fall and the winter time frame. And that makes it, or going into hot weather, if it's a cool season grass, and that makes it less able to withstand the stresses and survive. So that's why we want to try to maintain those good mowing practices and mow at the good frequency and the correct mowing height. Sharp mower blades provide the best quality cut. Here in this slide, you see the grass on the left of the slide picture there, and you see examples of very clean cut blades. And then, you got two that got nice, sharp, clean edges, not a lot of fraying, not a lot of shredding. But adjacent to those, you've got 3 examples of leaf blade tips that are just shredded as they can be. That was a dull cut right there. That mower did not cut that grass very cleanly. And then here's another shot. You see this is called fescue here in this right-hand picture. Example A, pretty nice clean cut. Example B, not a bad cut, but you see the brown streak there kind of below the cut. That's kind of what was bent over. But then you go over to C and D, look how jagged, how ragged those ends are. That was not a very clean cut. Dull mower blade. So mower blades, the duller the mower blade, the more damage it inflicts on the grass blade. And you think about it, these that are cut with dull blades, they have a larger wound area. And there's more surface area that has been damaged, so that's a bigger wound for water loss to occur through. That's a bigger wound for maybe a disease organism to enter into that grass plant. And it doesn't look nice. Here, this is an example of zoysia grass. It's been mowed with a dull mower blade, and when it's shredded like that end turns brown. And look out across that fresh cut yard after a few hours in the sun, and all those tips are brown like that. You think, boy, that's not very pretty. So, I encourage you to please cut the grass. Don't beat it into submission. Okay, use sharp mower. How often do you have to sharpen the mower blade? I don't know. It depends on how fast it becomes dull. Mowing grass will dull the blade. But typically once a year is not enough to provide a good, clean quality of cut. So please do that. Cut. If you want the grass to look its best, cut with a fairly sharp mower blade. Okay. Now we're talking about feeding these grasses. Fertilizer is going to provide those 2 to 4 square meals these grasses need on a yearly basis. Now, what is the key to a good fertility program? All right. Well, the key to a good fertility program is a soil test. That soil test is going to tell you what's out there in the ground in terms of available nutrients and also soil pH. Does it need to be modified? Does it need to be changed in order to allow that grass to utilize the available nutrients most efficiently? And then, what do you need to add? Do you need to add phosphorus, potassium? Do you need to add any iron, etc.? You don't know unless you do have a soil analysis. And nobody knows unless you have a soil analysis. And the best way to do that is to send it to a soil lab. University of Tennessee has a soil test lab. Other labs are out there. But the point is, don't guess a soil test. Okay, don't just arbitrarily start applying fertilizer and then wonder, why is this not responding the way I hope it will? Well, maybe you're not feeding it the way you're supposed to. And conversely, if you are applying nutrients at the ground that the grass doesn't need because the soil hasn't enough in there in the first place, then you're wasting. You're wasting your money, you're wasting the resource. So don't be wasteful. Now, the key to a good soil test is a good soil sample. And a good soil sample is one that is a composite that represents the area that's being managed as a field or as a unit. In this diagram of this illustration, it kind of indicates to you that they're taking a soil sample from the front yard, maybe one from the backyard. They're using the word lawn, yard, same thing. You don't necessarily have to do that. Okay, it's not necessary to sample different areas of the lawn or the front yard separate from the backyard, unless they're noticeably different. And if you notice that the grass just really grows differently in the backyard compared to the front yard, then yes, maybe you'll do a soil sample for the front and one for the back. But otherwise, if it's fairly uniform soil across the lawn area, then you're going to manage it as a unit. So you just collect a soil sample that includes sub-samples taken from the front yard, from the backyard, from the side yard, etc. And the way you do that, you just take something to dig with and a bucket to put the soil in. You start over in one corner of the lawn, and you're going to sample the top 6 inches of soil. And you're just going to kind of zigzag back and forth, kind of walking W pattern, so that you go to several locations, in the front yard, in the backyard, the side yards. How many does it take? Well, there's not too many, I guess. You can't take too many, but you kind of want, if you've got a decent sized yard, and I don't know what that means, decent size. It depends on where you live. But if you've got a 15,000 square foot lawn, it's not too much to ask, I don't think, to go to 10 to 12 locations across that 15,000 square foot and take 10 to 12 sub samples and mix those together to create a composite. Now, if you've only got a 5,000 square foot yard, maybe you only need 5 or 6, okay, to give a good representation. But the point is, you need numerous sub samples mixed together to create a composite. Now, a lot of times you see slides or folks talking about soil sampling. They've got a nice little soil probe, where they'll take cores out of the ground. Most people don't have one of those at home. I don't have one at home, but I do have a shovel, and a shovel can work just fine to take a soil sample. And now, granted, land's too expensive to be taking, shovelfuls of the dirt out of the ground and sending it off to the lab. And it doesn't take that much soil anyway. And besides that, your bucket gets too full, it's hard to carry. So here's an example showing you how to use a shovel, take a good soil sample. You take that 6-inch deep soil slice, or shovel slice of soil, and instead of putting the whole slice over in the bucket, use an old knife or something and cut just a center out of that slice, maybe 1 inch, 2 inches wide, remove any grass residue that's there on top of the plant, and drop that over in the bucket and mix it all together. And that's a good composite then for you to package up and send off to the soil lab. And leave the rest of that soil out there in the yard because it's too expensive to lose. When do we fertilize grasses? When they have their highest nutritional needs. Cool season grasses, well, all grasses have their highest nutritional need when they're most aggressively growing. So on the cool season grass side, that's going to be in the spring of the year and the fall of the year. On the warm season grass side, it's going to be just opposite of that. Now, I've alluded that you may apply anywhere from 2 to 4, or feed the grass 2 to 4 times per year. Okay, and when you get the results back from a UT soil lab, the UT soil lab will send you a report, and it will give you a range of recommendations based on your desired level of quality and the conditions that you have, and it will tell you that you're going to apply fertilizer 2 to 4 times per year. They recommend that the minimum application is twice per year, and then the maximum, somewhere in that 4 times per year range. And that should provide enough nutrition to grow a pretty good quality turf out there, especially if you go on that 4 times per year. But on the cool season grasses, if you're going on 2 times per year, it's going to come back. It's going to read something like this. You're going to apply an application in the spring, either in March or April. You choose one, and then in the late summer or fall, again, either September or October. So you choose the spring date and a fall date. Well, let's say you're going to go in the medium maintenance range. Apply 3 times per year. So again, you're going to choose a spring date, either March or April, and then a September and October date. So you choose one spring date with both the fall dates. And then on the high maintenance side, when you look at making 4 applications per year, you choose all 4 of the dates. Okay, and then you use fertilizers similar to what's recommended in the soil test report to supply the level of nutrition to help those grasses maintain and to achieve their highest quality of growth and performance. Warm season grasses, again, they do their best growth in the hot weather time, so that's when you're going to feed them. That's when they have the highest nutritional requirement. No, we're not going to fertilize those grasses in March or April, because they're not really going to be growing in March or April. They don't typically break dormancy much before the middle part of April, many years, but a lot of years, it's going to be early May. So we're going to fertilize them in that springtime up through late summer, kind of in the May through September time frame. All right. Now, here's an example. If you look at your fertilization schedule based on the soil test report from the University of Tennessee Soil Lab for a warm season turf, you're going to be looking at making the same number of fertilizer applications, but you're doing it at different times of the year because cool season, warm season grasses grow at different times of the year. Again, for a low maintenance lawn fertilization schedule for a warm season grass like Bermuda grass, twice per year. You choose a spring date, and April 15th is absolutely the earliest. Okay, and it has an asterisk there. You may adjust that based on green up. If your grass is not growing, by the middle of April, then you prolong that, because it can't really use that fertilizer very effectively unless you've got active growth taking place. But again, you choose one of the 2 spring dates, and then choose one of the summer dates, either July 15th or September 1st. We don't want to go much past the end or the early part of September, because as the days are getting shorter, that grass is naturally trying to slow down. But if we're making nitrogen fertilizer applications very late in September, then we're kind of encouraging that grass to try to grow when it needs to be going dormant and slowing down. So we're kind of, we're trying to create, or we're maybe unintentionally creating a bit of an artificial environment for it. So it needs to start slowing down that growth and start hardening off and getting ready to go dormant so that it's able to survive the cold weather. From a 3-time per year application of medium maintenance schedule, again, choose one of the spring dates and then both of the summer dates. And then if you're going on the high maintenance side, choose all 4 of the dates. But you choose the schedule based on what your desire, what your goals are, what level of quality you're looking for. When it comes to applying the grass, fertilizer spreaders are great tools to use. It doesn't matter if it's a broadcast spreader or a drop spreader. They can both work fine, but what you want to do is spread the correct amount of fertilizer uniformly and avoid this striping effect you see here. We've got green grass, we've got light green grass, dark green, light green, dark green, light green. Some person, probably a man, not listening to good direction, went out there and did not spread the fertilizer uniformly. So they hit some places, they miss some places. A drop spreader is one that will probably be more apt to let you make this kind of mistake, because that drop spreader, will back up this second, it only puts fertilizer where you roll the spreader. It just drops it between the wheels right there. So if you don't roll that spreader over a piece of ground, you don't fertilize that piece of ground. Whereas a broadcast spreader over here, it has a spreader plate or a spinning plate down here on the bottom of the hopper, and the fertilizer falls out of the hopper through an opening, and you adjust that opening wider or closer. That influences the rate of the fertilizer falls out of there. And then as you push it across there, it drops on that spinning plate and it flings it, or it spreads it out there in a broadcast in a semicircular fashion. So it typically covers an area with less opportunity to totally miss places than does a drop spreader. But they can both be good tools. It just depends on what you have, what your choices are. But kind of a hint to help you avoid skipping patterns with a drop spreader is do it when the dew's on the grass, because you can see your tracks very much more so than you can out on dry grass, and that lets you know how much you need to lap over in between between each pass, so that you don't create those streaks out there. And then again, with a broadcast spreader, if you want to be just really accurate about that and make sure you don't over fertilize a section and miss another section, instead of applying the whole rate of fertilizer for that particular area in one direction, cut it in half and spread half of it going in one direction and then spread the other half going at a 90-degree angle with that. And boy, if you do that, then you've just done a very uniform application of that fertilized material over that yard. Okay, we mowed grass, we fertilized grass, we're going to irrigate it, or maybe we're going to irrigate it, because turf grasses need water. That's one of the requirements. And depending on the time of the year it is and what's going on, they may use anywhere from a tenth to 3/10 of an inch of water every day, and that's on 1,000 square foot basis. Okay, a tenth to 3/10 of an inch of water per 1,000 square feet. So that can range anywhere from about 3/4 of an inch of water, or less, even depends if the grass is growing or not, up to more than 2 inches of water. Okay, hot weather or warm weather, the sun is shining, the wind's blowing, evaporation is taking place, grass is really growing. That's when it's looking at using those higher rates, and that 2 inches or better. As far as a year-round average is concerned, it works out somewhere in the neighborhood of an inch of water for every 1,000 square feet. Well, so how much is that? An inch of water? Well, an inch of water in 1,000 feet is about 620 gallons. That's how much it is. Okay, so that's a fair amount of water to put out there. So you want to use irrigation efficiently. You don't want to waste it. So some steps to take to meet your turfgrass need to minimize irrigation waste is, first of all, reduce evaporation loss. And you do that by irrigating early. And that can be before sunup. Okay, 3 to 6 a.m. can be early. There's nothing wrong with that. But you can irrigate in the middle of the day at noontime, but you may have more, you probably will have in hot weather, more evaporation loss. What you don't want to do is irrigate, late in the day, like in that 5 to 9 o'clock time frame, because during the heat of the summer, when the humidity is high, temperatures are high, and you've got a lot of moisture out there in that grass, that just creates a good environment for some of these disease pathogens that can attack turf grasses to grow and develop. Okay, and you also want to adjust run time to be more compatible with your soil infiltration rate. Here in this picture, you can see these sprinklers are running, the irrigation system is running, and it's a bit of a slope, and water's running from the lawn down into onto the pavement there, and down into the storm drain. There's not research anywhere that shows that asphalt benefits from the application of irrigation water, but you are wasting it right there. So if you see that your irrigation system, your sprinklers are applying water faster than the ground will soak it up, then you need to change the schedule some. Change how long it runs at a given time to minimize that, to avoid that. And conversely, if you see it puddling up and you're making puddles and it's soaking in, then you're applying water faster than the ground will absorb it. So you need to adjust that. It's better to water deeply less often, so that you're pushing water down into the soil layer, down where the roots are, versus, watering just a little bit every day and keeping the top of the soil down, because roots are lazy. Okay, they're like most folks. Why should I have to break my neck trying to reach deep down into the ground to get to this water when it's right here on the surface? So you do that, then you encourage the grass, the turf population to develop a very shallow root system. And so then when something does happen and they're not getting that daily watering, that ground dries out, it's like growing grass on top of a septic tank. That grass that has a very shallow root system starts to show damage. So, you take that inch of water or 2 inches of water that it's going to need per week and spread those out over 3 times or so the course of the week to apply that water. The reason we talked about not applying late in the day is because of this right here, the fact that disease can develop. This is active brown patch. It's a fungal disease that can be exacerbated by late day irrigation in the summer. And this gray, fuzzy, kind of webby material you see here is actually the mycelium of that particular fungal pathogen that's growing and spreading. This was taken early in the morning before the dew got on before the dew was burned off the grass by the sun, and it's very active. You can see it expand. Okay, so we want to avoid that, and a way to help minimize that is don't irrigate late in the day, so the grass has a chance to dry out before the sun sets. We talked about the importance of soil depth, and think about the soil as an underground water tank. Water stored in the root zone of the soil. That's the equivalent of an underground water tank that turf grass can rely upon. It can draw from. So the deeper the root zone is, the more water that tank will hold. And the more water the tank holds, the less irrigation is needed in between rain events in order to meet the needs of the grass. I mean, the grass doesn't care where that, a tenth of an inch or 3/10 of an inch of water comes from every day. It can be drawing it from the ground with those roots, or it can be applied as rainfall or as irrigation, just so long as it gets it. So that if you've got soil that's 20 inches deep, that 20-inch column of soil, think about that as a bottle. Okay, a 20-inch tall bottle is the same diameter as this 6-inch tall bottle over here, will hold a lot more water available for those plants to access than that 6-inch tall bottle. So just keep that in mind. Deeper soil, the better. The grass will tell you when it's starting to suffer from drought stress. In this illustration, you got good green grass over here. That's nice, healthy. But here with the grass, and they refer to it as being purple color, it does start to go off color, these patches in the good deep green grass that are starting to become less dark green, maybe a bit of a bluish green or purplish green color to it. That indicates that, maybe there's some thin soil areas are drying out faster. And if you were to take a probe out there and run it down in the ground, it wouldn't surprise me that in these areas that where you're seeing the grass go off color, you get an obstruction at a fairly, shallow level, depth, than you would over here in these areas where the grass is still nice and green. Here's an example. You can see this off color right here. I know that for a fact because it's mine, and that grass is, it's starting to how green it is out here, but then in this area, it is starting to get a tinge of brown in it. But it goes away from that good green color. It takes on more of a bluish kind of hazy green blue appearance to it, and that's because that ground is shallow right there. I mean, it's growing on the top of the second thing. I know what it is. So we talked about the primary practices. Now let's get into those secondary practices, and we'll be able to wind this thing up here pretty quick. Core aerification or aerifying was one of the secondary practices. Okay, aerification was invented, I guess, to reduce compaction. And so here's an illustration. And boy, this illustration, you can draw pictures, I guess, to represent anything you want to, assuming you can draw. So this person, this artist can draw pretty good. So they have drawn an illustration showing the benefits of core aerification. And so one of the first benefits is it will reduce water runoff and puddling almost immediately. Because, it makes sense. You punch holes in the ground in areas where water wants to stand and not penetrate the ground. Okay, you punch a hole in it, well, boom, there's the entry point for it to enter that soil layer. Okay, it makes sense. And if you punch holes in the ground where water is going to run off, okay, there are more entry holes there. So maybe more water will enter the soil versus running off. Okay, that makes good sense to me. It says that it improves turf grass rooting within 2 to 3 weeks. Well, maybe I don't know. Improved fertilizer uptake, use within 7 to 10 days. Enhances heat and drought stress tolerance in the long term. Enhances soil water uptake and use. Well, it can enhance soil water uptake because we create entry points for water in the soil. But what about, the enhancing heat and drought stress tolerance? Okay, enhancing its ability to tolerate those stresses. Well, yeah, if you can improve rooting by creating more roots and deeper roots, all right, yeah, that makes sense. If it improves fertilizer uptake, all right, then that makes sense that it could be, a more efficient use of fertilizer. And maybe a way that it improves fertilizer uptake theoretically is you get more fertilizer down into the soil profile faster because you've got entry points punched in the ground you didn't have before, and you encourage more roots to grow. So now you've got more roots to pick that fertilizer up. But does it really happen that way? This is a picture, but does it actually happen that way in the real world? Yes, it does. So this is not a drawing. This is a photograph. And these are grass roots growing in an aeration channel. Okay, now granted, this is growing on the athletic field, and they were able to pull that plug out pretty easily. Well, look at that massive root growth that's taking place in that aeration channel. So core aerification can be a positive thing to help improve turf grass growth. The next thing we had listed there in terms of a secondary practice was dethatching. Okay, well, what is dethatching? Dethatching is the removal of thatch. Well, what is thatch? Thatch is a layer of undecomposed grass plant parts that will build up sometimes between the crown of the grass plant up here and the soil line down here. So this area in between the green grass and the good brown soil, it's a lighter brown color or a different brown color, that is thatch. And it's made up of parts and pieces, like pieces of stolon, pieces of rhizome, roots that are sloughed off, leaf sheath that are sloughed off. Thatch develops most frequently on your creeping grasses like zoysia grass and Bermuda grass. Bunch grasses don't develop thatch very rapidly. As a matter of fact, it's uncommon to see them truly develop a true thatch layer. You may see a buildup of dead plant residue on top of the ground, but thatch is not on top of the ground. It's down here below the surface of the cracks on top of the soil. You don't really see thatch unless you dig out a plug of the turf that contains the soil on it and you look at it. Now, it's recommended that if you're growing a bunch grass and you've got a half inch or more thatch, you ought to dethatch. And the reason is, and here's another shot that shows the grass growing here and this thatch layer down here on top of the soil. Well, the reason that it's recommended that you dethatch that is once that thatch gets dry, it resists wetting, so it can impede water movement into the soil. So that's not good, and it can also impede air movement into the soil. So that's not good. So a thick thatch layer, and that would be one that's defined as a half inch or more, can be a detriment to the turf grass. So it's recommended that it be dethatched or that thatch removed at that point. Well, how do you do that? Well, there's some good tools out there. Fortunately, some of them are motorized, but there are some, that are manual, like these dethatching rigs you see down here. Now, they work pretty good, but they're a great exercise. And boy, if you've got a very big area to dethatch, then you certainly got your work cut out for you. But here, this shows the bottom of the dethatcher or the vertical mower, sometimes it is called, or the power rake. It's got a horizontal shaft running across here, and then it's got these blades attached vertically to it. And you can adjust how deeply those blades cut into the grass crown, the grass profile there. And you can see here where this person is running the dethatcher across and where they've been. They pulled up, that plant residue, that undecomposed material. So once you dethatch the area, you're going to remove that stuff. Either sweep it up, rake it up, or vacuum it up. Don't leave it out there. Take it, put it in the compost pile. But you want the control to remove it, then go ahead and get it entirely out of the yard and complete the job. But a thing to keep in mind is that both aerating and dethatching damage the grass. And so those need to be done when you've got a good growing period after the fact for them to recover. 4 weeks or so is a good goal to shoot for. So that tells us then that for the cool season grasses, late summer, fall is a good time to dethatch and aerate those if you're going to do that. And then for the warm season grasses, springtime like May through June are good times to dethatch and aerate those warm season grasses. Now, top dressing is a practice that a lot of people don't perform that. But what top dressing is, it's applying a thin layer of organic material such as compost over the lawn area after core aerification is taking place, and then raking or dragging that thin layer of compost. When I say thin, I'm talking about a half inch deep layer or half inch thick layer or less. Raking it over that aerated area help move that organic matter down into those aeration channels. So you're starting to introduce some organic material into that soil profile. And that's just a way to add organic matter into an existing turf and to help improve tilt and increase the organic matter content there. Okay. If you do it, by hand, yes, it's a job. It is. And would that be something that you would necessarily need to do to an entire lawn area? Well, maybe. Okay. But maybe you've got a particular spot that just doesn't perform as well as others. And you evaluated it and you've got soil depth. I mean, there's not a rock down there that's just keeping grass from growing, but it's just, it's not poor. It's just really tight clay, or maybe it's an area where some topsoil was removed or there was some more soil brought in to level things out and make it smooth, and it's just not as good quality. That's the way that maybe you focus your top dressing on an area like that to help improve that specific area. But again, doing that in the fall of the year after core aerification is an ideal time to make a top dress application. And there are machines out there, top dressing machines that will do that. But in our part of the world, you don't see a lot of those out there. Now, this little blue drum device down here, this is it's a top dresser. It's what it's called, and it's just a drum. The walls of the drum, the skin of the drum is made of a fairly heavy metal mesh. And it's of a size that the mesh openings are of a size that as you roll this drum across the area, then the organic material in there, the compost or the in this case it's peat moss, even some of the bag topsoil and whatnot, they can be used as top dress materials too. It falls out and just lays a thin layer of that over the area that you push it across, and they're not super expensive, but again, you can find them at various suppliers, sources online, other places, but they work pretty good. Broadcasting seed over an existing lawn after core aerification is a really good way to overseed that yard and to help to thicken up a population of turf grass that's been thinned out by wear or by disease or by weather conditions, whatever the case. And we typically overseed, the cool season grasses because they will beat stress damage very often during the summertime. And you may overseed those warm season grasses just so that you have green cover throughout the growing season. That's the goal. But either way, we wouldn't necessarily want to aerate, bluegrass lawn in September and sow grass on it because, is it going to have enough time to recover as it should? But for cool season grasses, since we do aerate those in the late summer, early fall time frame, and that's when we're going to plant grass seed. Well, so it's a good time to plant grass seed after aerification because what does aerification do? It opens up soil, so it cultivates it. Okay, so you create soil openings for that grass seed to lodge in, and so you typically have better germination of seed that contact the soil. Same thing is true of dethatching. If you dethatch a turf, you're going to expose some soil by doing it, and so broadcasting grass seed over the turf that needs to be overseeded after it's been core aerified or after it's been detached makes good sense because you have done some cultivation to open the soil up to make it more receptive to receive those grass seeds, and those seeds that are in contact with the soil tend to have better germination than those that do not. And then, since if you may be thinking about top dressing anyway, after you've broadcasted grass seed, then applying that thin layer of top dress material over that, again, you've got that thin layer of mulch that kind of acts like a mulch blanket to help maintain moisture around the seed and to keep the soil surface from drying out once it does get wet. So those are those secondary cultivation practices, maintenance practices. But now let's talk just a minute about weeds or reducing competition. Weeds, why are they a big deal? For some people, they're not. And, if weeds don't bother you in your yard, then weeds don't bother me in your yard. Okay. It's yours. You treat it as you want to, and you go for the desired appearance that suits you. But regardless of what your opinion about it is, weeds, as do any other plant that's growing in that turf area, they compete with turfgrass for space, for water, and for nutrients. And so, that competition can be to the point of detriment to the desirable turf grass, because many times some of those weeds will grow faster and they can outcompete the desirable grasses. So you wind up with in a competitive environment like that, sometimes the grass loses, and so there's less grass in the lawn area, and you wind up with more weeds in the lawn area. So what is then the best thing you can do to maintain a fairly uniform grass population without a lot of it? Well, the best thing you can do is, first of all, try to maintain a good dense stand of turf grass if your goal is to keep weed infestation to a minimum. So how do you do that? We've talked about all those ways this evening. You want to follow those recommended practices that will help you maintain a turf grass population. Number one, grow a turf grass suited for your site. If you're full of shade, you don't try to grow a move grass thing. If you're out in full sun, you don't try to go find fescue. You know, if you don't have enough sunlight to grow grass, then you don't try to grow grass, period. But so you grow something that has a chance to survive on your site. That's the first thing. And then you manage it as you should. You carry out those practices that are recommended like you should. You mow regularly. You mow at the correct mowing height. If you're going to err on being too short or too high, always err on the side of being higher than it's suggested as far as the recommended mowing height is concerned. You fertilize when the grass can use. Okay, you don't fertilize cool season grass in July. You don't fertilize cool season grass in August. It can't benefit from it. It's a waste of the resource, and it can be detrimental to the grass. But conversely, you will want to fertilize Bermuda grass and zoysia grass in July, in the heat of the summertime. And you want to fertilize with a fertilizer that contains the nutrients, that supplies the nutrients that your soil test tells you that you need. Don't just arbitrarily choose triple 13 every time, because you may not need phosphorus and potassium. And so it's a waste to put it out there. You know, if you get into a period when there is not adequate moisture to maintain good quality turf growth, then you irrigate. Okay, irrigate when it's necessary if you have the ability to. Perform those secondary practices when needed. And this is all part of doing the things to keep a good, dense population of turf grass out there in the first place. And that's like aerating, and that's like overseeding in order to maintain a good population of grass. If you're growing a cool season grass, you know, in Tennessee, especially here in Middle Tennessee, and I suspect even there where you are in Montgomery County, it's not uncommon that you're going to need to overseed it just about every year to keep a good dense population. And then finally, you know, herbicides are not your first option. They're not your first tool in the fight against weeds. But herbicides are a tool. Okay, they are a tool. So if you've done everything right that you're supposed to do, okay, that's the first thing. Make sure you're doing the right thing at the right time and the right way. And you do see, some weed populations starting to pop up. A few weeds out there. How noticeable is it from the road? It just depends on what your goals are. But if you don't mind a few weeds, they don't worry about it so much. But with weeds that produce a lot of seeds, and annuals do produce a lot of seeds, and as many of the perennials do, like the dandelions we saw there, they produce a ton of seed, and they can not only increase their population in your lawn, but they can be blown and carried into other people's properties as well. And crabgrass generates a ton of seed. Chickweed generates a ton of seed. Hairy bittergrass generates a ton of seed. So when you start to see these populations of weed pop out, then you start taking actions against them before it becomes just a lost cause and you're having to start all over again. A way to prevent a lot of annual weeds is to use a pre-emergent herbicide product. Here's an example. This is it's called crab. Here there's something crabgrass pre-emerge, but it's a pre-emergent herbicide. It works against things other than crabgrass. It works against annual weeds that germinate from seed, and it is applied pre-germination. That's why it's called a pre-emergent herbicide. Before it's applied prior to those weed seeds or those weed plants germinating and the weed emerging. Okay, those weed seeds germinating, the weed plant emerging. The pre-emergents don't do anything against emerged weeds, and they will not control perennial weeds, because perennial weeds that grow, year after year after year from the same root mass, from the same rhizome, the same tubers, and whatnot. They may produce seed, but whether they do or not, that plant's going to come back. Okay, so the pre-emergents don't do anything against those, but against things like crabgrass and goosegrass and these winter grass or these winter annual weeds that we see, like the purple flowered henbit, the purple flowered dead nettles, and the white flowered hairy bittergrass that grow throughout the fall and winter up into the spring in so many yards. A lot of those could be prevented by using a pre-emergent herbicide product, in the late summertime, because that's when those things start to germinate. Crabgrass, those summer annuals like crabgrass and goosegrass, they can be prevented to a large extent by using a pre-emergent herbicide product in the late winter, early springtime period. Okay, now when can you not use a pre-emergent herbicide? Well, you can't use a pre-emergent herbicide on a lawn if you're going to plant grass seed. because the pre-emergent product cannot tell the difference between a grass seed and a weed seed. Okay, so that's the reason that for people that are using cool seeding grass like tall fescue, there's not a lot of pre-emerge applied on tall fescue lawns in the fall of the year to keep those winter annuals like the chickweed, the henbit, and so on out because they're overseeded. But if you've got a warm season grass lawn like Bermuda grass or zoysia grass, you're not going to overseed that with ryegrass. My gosh, you can apply these things, in the early part of September up through the germination period. They don't all germinate at the same time. It's not too late to probably see some benefit from reducing winter weed populations in lawns today. Okay, they haven't all germinated at this point. I suspect in most places, but they can have a big impact in reducing those populations on those that are going to germinate from seed. But what about when the weeds are already up and growing? So let's say you sow tall fescue in the fall of the year. And so after you do that, you get it germinated, it's up and growing, and then up in November and December, you notice, man, I've got these little chickweeds out here, henbit, so on. Well, shoot, do you have to wait till next spring to do something about it? No. Post-emergent herbicides, like the ladies applying here with the sprayer, should be applied anytime you have emerged weeds when they're actively growing. Okay, when after they've emerged and they're actively growing. And on overseeded tall fescue and bluegrass and ryegrass yards in the late fall and early winter time frame, and I'm talking up in November and in December, chances are pretty good those grasses have achieved enough growth, enough size and maturity about them till they can you can apply a post-emergent weed control product to them to control those young, actively growing broadleaf weeds like chickweed, like henbit, like dead nettle. The product will tell you whether you can or not. Very often it'll say that, on newly overseeded turf grasses like tall fescue, et cetera, delay applying until the grass has been mowed 3 times. Okay. Well, if you planted this stuff in September, oh gosh, by the end of November, if you hadn't mowed it 3 times, you probably had a failure. There's not enough grass out there to worry about. And with many of the herbicide products today that are designed for broadleaf weed control, and that just means that they control broadleaf weeds, not grasses, they'll work in cool weather, down in the 50-degree range. And the product labels will tell you that. A thing to keep in mind when you're looking for herbicide products, if you're going to use an herbicide, is that not all herbicides are labeled for all turf grasses. For example, some are labeled for use on Bermuda grass and zoysia grass, and maybe St. Augustine grass, but not on tall fescue. And conversely, some are for use on tall fescue, but you can't use them on Bermuda grass, or you can maybe not use them on St. Augustine grass. So you pay attention to that. Pay attention to the label. Read what it says. Okay, labels aren't great literature, but they're very important. And reading those tell you how much to apply, when to apply it, what it can be applied to, what weeds it's expected to control. And the secret to success using any herbicide product is you put the right amount out at the right time. Okay. And you put it on a target that it has a chance of control. Okay. So, part of the process is having an idea of what the weed is. So, okay, you may need some help identifying some weeds. Well, I'm going to show you a couple of resources here that might help you do that. So we talked about a lot of practices and things, and that's a lot of stuff to remember. And you don't have to put it all in your memory. Okay. There are a lot of publications out there. For example, this is the lawn maintenance calendar. So this is the 2023 lawn maintenance calendar. Well, so it's 2023 is almost over. Well, you know what? There's one coming out for 2024, and you can access these at uthort.com. You can download that. Maybe the folks there at the Montgomery County Extension Office, they may have some. I don't know, but that this is a calendar that's available to you. And what it does, it has a task list by month of the different things you might consider doing for the particular grass type that you have. Okay. Here it talks about, in February, and I know this is the February page. It talks about applying pre-emergent herbicides in the springtime when forsythia are blooming to help control or help minimize crabgrass infestations, etc. And it goes through each month with a task list for cool season grasses and for warm season grasses. It'd be a great resource. this publication. And again, these are available at uthort.com. You know, you don't have to remember a big website, any long address, uthort.com. Lawn and Landscape Weed Control for Homeowners. This is a good multi-page publication that can help you with your battle against weeds, both in the lawn and in the landscape. A couple of other good publications. Here's a Bermuda grass lawn care calendar. If you want to get more in depth in managing and maintaining Bermuda grass turf. Here's one that focuses specifically on the fescue, for selecting, establishing, and maintaining the fescue. Good publications, good resources for you out there. From a weed control standpoint, the UT Turfgrass Weed Science webpage, the address that's down here in the yellow bar, tnturfgrassweeds.org. That can be an excellent resource for finding information about controlling particular weed problems that you may have in your home lawn. One of the tools that is available is this thing called the Mobile Weed Man. It's an app that can be used on a desktop, laptop, or on a mobile device. It's really designed for use on mobile device. And this thing will help you identify weeds. It's got weed identification features. It has there are fact sheets available at the Tennessee Turfgrassweeds.org, tnturfgrassweeds.org, for controlling broadleaf weeds, and then those for controlling grass weeds. Here's an example under this is from under the broadleaf weed control category. Here web publication 266, ground ivy control. You click learn more here, and boom, it brings you to the ground ivy weed publication on controlling that. Ground ivy, also known as creeping charlotte. It takes you through, gives you the information about how to identify ground ivy, specifically know if that's what you have, and then what the control options are to help you control that. So we've covered a lot of information. And we've been doing this for, going on over an hour now, maybe an hour and a half. And we've talked a lot about the different kinds of grasses out there, the challenges that we face in the transition zone for growing those grasses, the things that we can do to maybe give us the best chance of being successful at growing those grasses. So I'll leave you with this. If you follow those recommendations, and if it's your goal to have a nice yard, whatever that definition means to you, and you're successful, just remember that if you've got the nicest yard on the block, you may not be able to enjoy it yourself, because all the neighbors and all the kids want to come to your yard to play there and ask you what it is you're doing, what's your secret to having this nice yard. So just think about that, because sometimes, you ask for something and you get it, and it might be a little different than what you'd really been hoping for. And with that, folks, I say that's all. And I'm going to end this, and probably to your pleasure, I'll be ending this, and I'll be glad to entertain any questions about trying to grow turf grasses and home lawns in Tennessee, if you have any for me.
All right, thank you, Mitchell. Let's see. Okay, questions.
Question is, what is a good top dressing that you would recommend?
A good top dress material, if you have the option to use a compost, a mature compost, that would probably be the first choice out there. It's just hard to beat a good mature compost material. And depending, a lot of garden centers, a number of garden centers carry bulk compost. It may be a spent mushroom compost, and that's where that's probably an animal manure-based compost that they were growing a mushroom crop in, and it can be purchased by the yard. That may be the most economical way to do it, but that's an option for smaller areas. Large bales of peat moss can work pretty good. They're not a bad choice. But even some of the higher quality bagged topsoils can work as a top dress. And they can become expensive if you're doing a large area. But for smaller areas, it can certainly be an option. But my first choice, I guess, would be mature compost.
Okay, thank you. What's our next? Okay, mushrooms growing in the grass. Usually, the mushrooms growing it's the end process of decomposition. So something is decomposing in your soil, or it's in your area. Maybe there was a tree there years ago that could be Just breaking down. Mitchell, do you have anything to add to that?
I was going to say, when you got mushrooms that are growing in the grass, that means there's a food source under the ground. And most often it's going to be some kind of wood food source, whether it's an old tree root or, buried construction residue that's decomposing. And how deep is it? I don't know. It may be just an inch or two down there, and you may be able to remove it easily. But there's not a pesticide or a product that you're going to spray out there that's going to eradicate that source underneath the ground. So you either try to dig down and find it and remove it, or you go out and practice your golf swing by knocking those mushrooms. Do some practice there, I guess.
But if the morels come.
Don't eat them. Okay?
No, they're not gonna be in the
Don't eat the mushrooms.
commercial.
'Cause I don't know if they're poison or not. I don't. They might-
Yeah, the ones that look like little puffball mushrooms don't even.
No, don't eat any of them. You never know. If you don't buy it at the store, don't eat it. Well, I'm afraid to recommend anybody eat a mushroom. They pick in the wild. I don't know about it to recognize a good one from a bad.
A bush type cedar, can it be used to spread fertilizer? If so, it has a dial setting that just goes like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which increases the amount of spread. How do you figure out how much fertilizer to spread with those kind of spreaders?
Well, you asked a good question now, and I didn't understand the first part. Did you say a broadcast spreader or a drop spreader? Which kind?
No, it's mainly for sowing seed, but
Right.
the fertilizer probably would go through it, but it has a dial from 1 to 5 on how open the opening is.
Yeah.
And I guess the question is, can you and how do you know where to set that dial to spread fertilizer?
You can figure it out, but again, what type is it? The drop type or the broadcast type?
No, it spins.
The spinner.
Right.
Okay, so it's a broadcast. Okay,
Right.
so there's a couple of ways that you can do that. And one of those is I think keep in mind that the faster that spinner plate turns, then the wider the arc is that it spreads material over. So one of the keys to figuring out how to set this thing is to walk at a consistent speed, so that your arcs, your spread arc is consistent. Because if you walk fast or you walk slow, or if the thing spins fast and it spins slow, up and down, then you're fluctuating. The application rate changes, because if you're applying a band of material over a narrow space, the application rate may be higher. But if you're applying that band of material over a wider space, then it's lower, because you're spreading the same amount of material over a wider space versus the same amount of material over a narrow space. So that's the thing to keep in mind is you got to use a consistent speed. Okay, so you keep that in mind, and then a couple of ways to do this. One is measure off a 1,000 square foot area. Okay, that could be a 20 by 50 foot area. All right, and then you weigh a quantity of fertilizer, so you'll know how much you're putting in the spread. All right, so let's say you weigh 20 pounds. You put 20 pounds of fertilizer in the spreader, and you choose a setting. If it goes from like 1 to 5 or 1 to 6, whatever, you might start just a little bit below halfway. Again, it depends. Is it a fine fertilizer like small granules, or is it a larger fertilizer material? The bigger the pellets, the bigger the hole space it takes for it to drop through. But you choose a setting. If you don't have any idea where to start, you just choose a setting. All right, and then you cover that 1,000 square foot area. You do that. You spread. You do a uniform allocation of that 1,000 square foot, and then if you've done that, then you dump the remaining fertilizer out of the spreader and weigh what you have left. So the difference between what you started with and what you wound up with, let's say you wound up with 14 pounds. You started with 20 pounds. So then that at that walking speed or that spinning speed and at that particular setting that you're applying 6 pounds of that fertilizer on a 1,000 square foot base. And so if it's less than what you wanted to apply, then you got to open it up a little wider. If it's more than what you wanted to apply, then you think, well, shoot, I just wasted some fertilizer, over applied it right here, and you've got to turn it down a little bit. And so you just have to play with it. If there are not any recommendations for that, how to set that particular machine for the fertilizer you're using, and many of the fertilizer products will. I mean, there are more probably brands of spreaders than there are fertilizers like this, and some of those aren't mentioned anywhere on the bag of fertilizer, on the package of fertilizer. But even if they are, it's not a bad idea to check that periodically just to see if your spreader is accurate or not. Does that make sense?
So one follow-up question, since the soil test itself doesn't give nitrogen, doesn't do nitrogen, what fertilizer in the fall would you recommend for full season?
Okay, so if you don't need any phosphorus or potassium, then based on your soil test, then you're going to use a nitrogen fertilizer, and it doesn't matter which one it is. Okay, so long as it has nitrogen in it and nothing else, just nitrogen, because your goal is about a pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. Okay, so let's say you choose you go down to the garden center and you buy one that's, I don't know what's a common one you see. They're like 25% or 27% nitrogen fertilizer, 2700, or maybe you go with maybe you use an organic fertilizer product like blood meal. What is blood meal? Like 12% nitrogen, something like that, Carla? Is that right?
Something like that.
Okay, so we use two examples. So let's say you've got a choice of maybe using this one. It's, let's say 20%, let's say 27%. So your goal is to apply 1 pound of nitrogen. So how much of that 27% fertilizer does it take to do that? Well, what you want is a pound, is 1. Well, what you have is 27%, 0.27. So you divide what you want by what you've got. So you divide what you want, which is 1, by what you've got, which is 0.27. And it tells you that you will need to apply 3.7 or 3 3/4 pounds of a 27% nitrogen fertilizer for every 1,000 square feet to give you 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. Okay, and they'll work for any fertilizer out there. Well, let's say, okay, I want to go with a blood meal, which is 12% nitrogen. So what I want is 1 pound of nitrogen. I divide that by 0.12, 12%, and it tells me it's going to be just a little over 8 pounds, like 8 1/3 pounds of blood meal. If blood meal is 8%, I won't swear, or excuse me, 12%. I won't swear that it is, but somewhere in that neighborhood, it's fairly low analysis. It's going to take about 8.3 pounds of a 12% nitrogen fertilizer to give you that same pound of nitrogen. Does that make sense?
That answer. Okay. Other questions? Got anything else?
I got a question.
Okay.
Lots of times you see lawns with low spots. What's the best way to fill in those low spots?
With a good, with as high quality soil as you can find, and I'm talking about mineral soil. If you have access to it, and that soil that's been dug out of the ground somewhere, not necessarily soil out of a bag, because you want it to match up as best as possible with natural with mineral soil out there. And very often those retail outlets, those retail businesses that sell bulk compost, so they sell bulk mulch, they'll also sell bulk soil, and very often you'll be able to find screened topsoil or screened soil that has been run through a screen, removed some of the debris that might be in there, rocks, root pieces, etc., things like that. And often you can find it even it's had some compost mixed with it, which that would not be a bad thing. But if you've got to add, if it's just a little bit, if you just wanted to make a fraction of an inch different in elevation change, then, you know, maybe some bag soil wouldn't be the end of the world to do that. But you know, you think about that, if you use these manufactured soil products, they have a lot of wood residue in them, real high organic matter. Well, that texture is just different than the texture of that native grain, that native mineral soil. And so that can influence how water moves between those two vastly different textural layers. And it may move rapidly, you know, in through the high organic matter stuff. It's got a very coarse texture, but it gets down to that more native soil, and it may want to hold right there and not move in because it's a finer texture. So if you've got to add a lot of soil to fill that low place in, I think the closer it is to the mineral soil, the better it is. So that's going to be soil that's been dug out of the ground, and it may have been, you know, altered a little bit.
And getting extreme topsoil is important. And always inspect your load. Like if you're getting a dump truck load or something from a local company, make sure that it is screened, or if you're going to get a load of rocks, things like that. So.
Oh yeah, I suggest going to the place that supplies it, you know, and here, show me the dirt pile.
Yeah.
Let me pump around your dirt pile there just a little bit.
Always inspect it before you accept the load. Plants, soil, whatever.
Now, you know, you can't tell what's in the bottom of that dump truck, so
No.
you know, you do the
No.
best you can.
Yeah, what's on top of you. Okay, she's asking about if you had kind of a low area,
It's not.
just a small low area that you would take the grass off, put the soil down, and then put the grass back on top of it.
Well, yeah, because if you
Good.
add a deep enough layer of soil over the grass, then you'll smother it. Okay, but if it's not real deep, then you know it won't necessarily smother the grass, and it'll kind of work its way down. But if you're talking about, you know, 3 inches, 2 inches or so, well, I might want to think about cutting that grass out. You know, just like cutting sod out and then filling in a place and replacing the sod, you know, back there where it was.
Okay. All right. Anybody else? Question for you. All righty. I don't see anything in the chat. Does anybody on Zoom have a question?
I don't see any questions in the chat.
Nope, I don't see any. Okay, Mitch, thank you a lot. We appreciate it. We'll eat some food for you before we go home.
If you got a piece of pie, eat too. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you for your time tonight. We appreciate it.
All right, thank you. I hope you got some benefit from it, and you know, good luck for the rest of your class.
Definitely. All right. Thank you. Bye.
All right, you're welcome. Bye bye.